nobody believed that a woman in her 50s could, after a long corporate career, could overnight become an entrepreneur and really build a company from scratch.
Welcome to the latest instalment of the Positive Disruptor, where I speak to founders and business leaders who are transforming their sector for the better. Today, I am delighted to be joined by Anne Boden, the founder of Starling Bank, the challenger brand that's disrupting the banking industry forever. Now, Anne has really changed the way we manage our money, and her relentless focus on customer service has proven to be a real recipe for success. Well, thank you so much, Anne, for joining me on a very bright, sunny morning.
Good morning, and thank you for inviting me.
I always really like to start at the beginning because it's amazing how much I think people's upbringing has shaped what they went on to do. So it'd be great if you could just talk a little bit about your upbringing.
Yes. My father, worked in the steel industry. My mother worked in a department store. I had a sort of fantastically supportive upbringing where my father sort of really encouraged my interest in techie things. For my 4th birthday, I think I had a reel-to-reel tape recorder. But we were from a very, very ordinary home, but a very, very supportive home. I did chemistry and computer science at university. And that was the start of my love affair with technology. And I applied for a job with a bank because that was seen as being a safe job. And I sort of rocked up in London in the early 80s to be work in the systems department of Lloyds Bank. And that was the start of my career with finance and technology, a career that I've really enjoyed.
So why don't we just sort of build from there in terms of, obviously, you were in that conventional banking industry and you had many very high profile roles. Talk a little bit about maybe what you started to observe in those different roles that you were experiencing and what led you to believe there was something you wanted to change.
Well, I had a long career at some of the biggest banks in the world. I worked in, London and Zurich and Amsterdam and Chicago with some of the biggest financial services companies in the world. But post-financial crisis, the 2008-2009 crisis, I came to the conclusion that banks were too inward-looking. They were solving their own problems, and they weren't actually going out there and solving customer problems. And therefore, I decided that somebody should start a new bank. And it took me a while to realize it could be me. But in 2013, I quit my job as Chief Operating Officer for Allied Irish Banks to start a new bank. And that was the start of Starling.
For those people who are missing out, who are not Starling customers, it'd be great if you could talk a little bit about, what is Starling Bank? Why is it different?
Yeah, we decided that a new bank had to have certain features. It had to be technology enabled. Technology had changed so many industries, and banking could really benefit from having technology at its core. A very new business model where we don't make money from cross-selling and upselling, but we provide a very fair service to customers. And above all, a customer that had empathy, a customer that related to real customers. Nowadays, we have 2 million plus customers. 300,000 of those are business customers, and we're growing very, very fast. I think somebody opens a Starling account every 30 odd seconds. Things are going really well, and we're growing very, very fast.
I would love for you to talk a little bit about your journey, because you definitely had a pretty kind of a long journey to get there. And I think it's a one we could all kind of learn a lot from.
Yeah, well, I quit my job end of 2013 to start a bank. And I literally thought it was going to be easy. I had a long track record in banking. I thought I'd sort of knock on a few sort of doors of venture capitalists and say I was going to start a new bank, and I only needed a few $100 million. And this bank was going to be very different. It was going to have technology at its heart. It is going to be built from scratch with the best technology in the world. It's going to have a very, very fair, engaging model with customers. And it's going to be, it's going to thrive, and it's going to grow and grow and grow. And guess what? Nobody believed me. And nobody believed that a woman in her 50s could, after a long corporate career, could overnight become an entrepreneur and really build a company from scratch. And therefore, raising money was very difficult. I spent 2 years, funding things myself, and people helping me out, and took me 2 years to raise funding. But once I raised that funding, the idea was so well formed, the ideas were so well rounded that we were ready to build what's become, I think, one of the best banks in the world.
You're such a positive person, Anne. So when you talk about it in a very optimistic way, but I think you must have had moments where you were personally thinking, I can't do this. How do I carry on?
Yeah, I think it was some days it was really tough. And I took, I really looked to other entrepreneurs' books for reassurance that things can get better. So I spent a lot of my time reading startup books, books about product management, books about technically doing the job of being an entrepreneur of a tech company. But I also spent a lot of time reading about the lives of other entrepreneurs and the ups and downs. And that really inspired me. And that really sort of, led me to write my own book, Banking on It. That came out at the end of last year. So yeah, the story of starting Starling, the story of my ups and downs, I hope will inspire other people.
For those of you who haven't read it, I would really recommend it, but it's a really honest account, and I think really brave actually to put it out there, because a lot of people it's just easier not to. And we'd love to hear just what's been the reaction to the book, and I can hear you really care about sharing that experience to help others. But even so, how did you convince everyone that that was a good thing to do? It'd be just fascinating to talk a little bit about actually the journey of writing the book and the reactions in general.
Yeah, writing the book was some people thought it was courageous, some people thought it was brave. I decided to write the warts and all story of founding a new business. I think lots of the business books and entrepreneurial books, or I did this with my business, tend to leave out the bad days or leave out when things go really wrong. So I set out to write the real story of sometimes things were really, really tough, and I was just hoping that I could last another couple of weeks and things would get better. But Banking on It is my story, and of the absolute, raising money was pretty tough, and how I did it, and the joys of getting the banking license, and the really, really sort of horrible things that sometimes happen to me on the way. But I hope that other people read it when they're having the horrible days, because I was reading other entrepreneur books when things weren't going well for me. And I hope that people will get some inspiration and some guidance on how to start their own businesses.
The other aspect that I find fascinating, and you touched on it in terms of being a woman and obviously already having a very successful corporate career, getting people to believe in you as a founder, as an entrepreneur. So, I see you also as a positive disruptor for looking at kind of what does leadership look like, what do entrepreneurs look like in today's world. Do you feel that sense of responsibility? I'm sure you have a lot of people come up to you and sort of tell you what an inspiration that is.
Yeah, I think people need to be, entrepreneurs are not the typical, guy with a beard in his mid-30s. It's, entrepreneurs look like me. Entrepreneurs look like lots of different people, a diverse group of people. And we need more role models. We need people to see that entrepreneurship is not always good. Every day is not a success. And a lot of the success in entrepreneurship is dealing with things that don't go well. And what I want to do is to, as well as speaking up and sharing my story, I hope a lot of other people who are not typical entrepreneurs are inspired and start the journey of starting their own business.
I'd like to take a little bit of a sort of a step change here and talk a little bit about sort of innovation. And my understanding is that, what I've seen in the past year, big banks have huge innovation teams now. They are putting a lot of money into this space, but yet, no doubt, when you were starting up, it was far more nimble. You'd have to, I would imagine, be more entrepreneurial. So, how do you compete with that now? And I'm sure a lot of the big banks are looking at Starling to see what you're doing. How do you keep up with that sort of pace? How do you stay ahead, really?
It's not difficult to stay ahead when you're competing with large organizations. The big banks are full of very, very clever people doing a great job, but they're dealing with a different problem. They're dealing with the fact that they don't have to succeed. They can afford to fail. With a new bank, you can't afford to fail. You have to be on your toes all the time. We are very innovative because we have to be innovative to lead the way. Every time I see a billboard on the side of the road where a big bank is advertising a feature we launched 3 years ago, I think, Starling's changing things, but Starling's changing an industry as well. But it's not just innovation that banks like Starling lead on. We lead on cost base. And I think that there will be innovation. There'll be a war of innovation, but far more important is the war on cost base. Because if you can control our costs, which Starling does, because all our technology is new, we're a new organization with new technology, we can lead and we can share that benefit with our customers, because customers decide. Customers are, coming to Starling and enjoying Starling, and they are leaving the big banks. And for the first time ever, we're not, the new banks are not competing against each other. We're competing against HSBC, we're competing against Barclays, we're competing against the Lloyds Bank of this world, and we're winning.
And as much as I try and avoid talking too much about COVID in this series, I think we can't ignore it. And given COVID has accelerated a lot of this change in behaviour, what was the impact on your business, and maybe how are you doing things, if at all, differently since obviously COVID started?
Well, Starling was built for the cloud and operates very well in the cloud. So as soon as lockdown happened, we transitioned, and our engineers continue to generate lots of interesting things. So we launched a connected card, I think, within something like 2 to 3 weeks. And that connected card was recommended by NHS volunteers, which is a card to give to people that are helping you if you're self-isolating. We also launched a check imaging very, very quickly. But our biggest contribution to this horrible sort of period where lots of people have lost their lives and very, very, very many families have experienced such heartache is that we have been helping small businesses with bounce back loans. We've done about nearly 2 billion of government-backed lending. So that's lending where we lend to small businesses, and it's on our balance sheet. So it's Starling funds that go out the door, but they're backed by a government guarantee. So we have been part of the bounce back lending scheme, and more than 40,000 small businesses have benefited from these loans and are really thriving because we've helped them survive in this very difficult time. So Starling is a lender, and we've been making sure that we get the lending into the hands of these small businesses as quickly and as efficiently as possible, whilst undertaking all the various fraud checking that we have to do to make sure that the money goes to the right places.
Now I'm going to go back to you, Anne, and you as a leader and an entrepreneur, and I'm going to keep digging a little bit deeper because, when I think about Positive Disruptor, you are just the very big P in Positive Disruptor in terms of just your outlook on things. But I know we touched on the journey to build Starling and get investment was tough, but if you look back now on that time, or just the journey of the past even few years, I suppose, what would you give it? Maybe I hate this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. What advice would you have given to yourself back then that you know now?
I think if I knew how hard it was going to be and how tough it was going to be, I probably wouldn't have started. So a bit of positive naivety is probably a good idea. I really thought it was going to be a lot easier. I thought there was a perfectly logical explanation. The plan I had was doable. The plan I had was audacious. It was ambitious. But I believed that we could deliver it, and somebody should invest in us to deliver it. 6-7 years later, yes, we have delivered on that vision. We have done everything we set out to do. But it was really, really difficult in the early days trying to convince people. But I believed in it, and lots of people around me bought into that vision. So looking back now, I'm so pleased that I thought it was going to be easier than it actually turned out to be.
I don't want to highlight any mistakes, but I am curious, if you went back now, were there any really big mistakes that you've learned, you've gone, oh, I don't know why I did that, or I would have changed?
Yeah, I think that I think that along the route you tend to know about product decisions deep down before you actually change your mind about something. There are certain products that didn't really fly off the shelf, people didn't resonate with, and despite the fact that you're getting that feedback, you don't actually act that too quickly. I can't really recall many of those occasions, but I think it's a question of when you get feedback, do something about it.
I think that's definitely a good lesson for us all. We touched on, again, you being the first female founder of a bank. Now, given that is the case, has it made you really even more passionate about changing the industry from a kind of gender point of view?
Yes, well, but I've been in finance, many, many years, and there aren't many women. I've been in tech, and there aren't many women in tech. And then you add entrepreneurship, and there are hardly any women in entrepreneurship. I think something like 1% of VC funding goes to female-founded teams. So, yeah, there are not many of us. But the more people see successful founders in this industry that are women, the easier it's going to become. So, yep, there are, it's tough. You have to have more conversations than men, to be honest. But you should have more conversations, and you'll eventually get that funding.
You'd hope by now, in the society we live in today, it would have improved significantly, and it hasn't. So why do you think that's the case?
I think women are held to a higher bar. I think there's no tolerance of women getting it a little bit wrong. I don't think women will be allowed to lose hundreds of millions for their company. But if you think what's happening in corporates today, and the vast majority of people are working for large corporates, women tend to be held to a higher bar. They are people tend to criticize their work much more, and they tend to hold themselves to a higher bar. Many excellent women are losing out to jobs to average men.
For those people sitting watching this interview thinking, oh, I've got a great idea, I just don't know what to do next, or what advice would you give to someone, given you have probably done the toughest thing possible, which is launch a bank? Like, what advice would you give to someone watching this going, I just don't know what to do?
Talk about it. There's a certain thing about entrepreneurs think their idea is going to be unique, and if they tell people about it, somebody else will do it. No, the world's not short of good ideas. There are plenty of good ideas. There are just not enough people to execute them. You've got to have the right people to execute those ideas. So talk about your ideas, get it out there. Try to launch. Try to get it done. Don't spend too long consulting. Realize that a lot of the advice you'll get will be bad advice. Be careful of all those people who tell you it can't be done. Because if you think it can be done and you have the capability to execute, perhaps you're the person that'll make it happen for the first time. A lot of people are talked out of good ideas, but it is possible I started out with an audacious idea. I had 2 years of being told by hundreds and hundreds of people that I'd never raise any money. But I did. And I got the product to market. And then people loved it. And more people came to Starling. I think that keeping on going is important, and riding out the bad days, because a good day may be tomorrow.
Well, thank you so much, Anne. And so you should be so proud, because not only have you built a phenomenal business, you have added a lot of value to a lot of people's lives in the service that you provide. But for me, I have to say, you are such a great example of what really a positive disruptor can do to an industry, and be such an inspiration and role model for so many future entrepreneurs out there. And I just have such admiration for you. So a huge thank you again, Anne, for chatting with me today.
And thank you for inviting me. I've really enjoyed it.